When I discovered my wife's affair and her plan to leave me with nothing, it was not through a letter or a suspicious credit card bill. It was through a ghost on an old audio tape. I did not yell or break a single thing. I just smiled, kissed her cheek as she left for her yoga class, and went back to my workshop to engineer her downfall, using her own whispered lies as the primary instrument. Some truths are hidden in the noise. You just need the right equipment to isolate them. Before we drop the needle on this track, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered a secret in a way no one would ever expect? My name is George Bellamy, and for a 72-year-old man, my hearing is still perfect. It has to be. I am a sound engineer, and my life has been a long love affair with the purity of analog audio. Here in Detroit, Michigan, my world is a small, beloved vinyl record store called Motor City Grooves, a place I built with my own two hands after my first wife, Martha, passed away. The store is my sanctuary, a temple of warm, rich sound, filled with the scent of old cardboard sleeves and the quiet crackle of a diamond needle finding its groove. Every record on these shelves tells a story, not just in its music, but in its very existence, its weight, its faint imperfections. This is a truth I understand, a truth you can feel. My second wife, Corinne, is a woman of a different frequency. I met her 10 years ago, a whirlwind of charisma and sophistication who brought color back into my quiet life. She called my store charming and my passion for vinyl adorable. I thought she loved this part of me, my connection to a tangible, authentic past. I thought we were building a new harmony together. The dissonance began subtly, a low hum of discontent beneath the melody of our daily lives. She began talking about retirement, not as a peaceful shared future, but as an escape. "George, darling," she would say, running a hand over the dusty record bins, "don't you ever get tired of all this? This place is a chain around your neck. Think of the freedom we could have. We could travel, see the world, live a little." Her words were always wrapped in a blanket of loving concern, but they carried a sharp, insistent edge. Then Tristan came into the picture. Corinne introduced him as a community-minded developer, a man with a vision for revitalizing the neighborhood. He was slick, with a bright, predatory smile and a handshake that felt like an appraisal. He started visiting the store with Corinne, praising its historic character and good bones. It was all a performance, a carefully orchestrated prelude to the main event. The proposal, when it came, was presented as Corinne's brilliant idea. Tristan's company would buy the building and the business. They would preserve the legacy, and we would be free, with a payout large enough to fund the life of travel and luxury she had been dreaming of. "It's our chance, George," she had said, her eyes shining with what I mistook for joyful tears. "Our chance to finally have a life without all this work." I trusted her. I saw the gray in my own hair. I felt the ache in my back after a long day of hauling crates of records, and I let myself believe her. I agreed to the sale. The betrayal was discovered by accident in the quiet hum of my workshop. I had decided to undertake a nostalgic project, digitizing our old family audio recordings, a mix of cassette tapes and reel-to-reels from years past. I was working on a tape from our anniversary party just 2 months prior. The recording was noisy, full of laughter and overlapping conversations. I was trying to isolate a funny story my brother was telling in the background. I threaded the tape through my best machine, put on my professional-grade headphones, and went to work, using my soundboard to filter out the extraneous frequencies, peeling back the layers of noise to get to the clean signal underneath. As I adjusted the equalizers, a conversation from across the room swam into focus, suddenly as clear as if they were standing next to me. It was Corinne and Tristan. Their voices were low, intimate, and venomous. "He's so lost in the past, he can't see the future I'm building for us," Tristan said, his voice a smug whisper. Corinne laughed, a sound that was no longer beautiful, but chilling. "Patience, my love," she replied. "He'll sign anything I put in front of him. He actually believes this is about our retirement. He has no idea about Aruba." "And the accounts?" Tristan asked. "I'll have access to everything the moment the sale closes," she confirmed. They'll drain them and be on a plane before the old fool even realizes the store is empty." I sat there, frozen, the headphones clamped to my ears, the world outside gone. It was not just an affair. It was a complete, systematic plan to strip me of everything: my business, my savings, my home, my dignity. The betrayal was not a suspicion. It was a high-fidelity, master-quality recording. My heart felt like it had been ripped from my chest. But as the initial shock subsided, it was replaced by a cold, quiet fury. My entire life had been about finding the true signal in the noise, and I had just captured the purest signal of her treachery. She thought my love for the past was my weakness. She was about to find out that a master of old technology can still engineer a very modern and very public downfall. I took off the headphones, the silence of my workshop suddenly feeling heavy and suffocating. The cheerful party chatter still playing on the tape was a grotesque mockery of the truth I had just unearthed. My first instinct was a primal one: to storm out of the workshop, confront Corinne, and watch her carefully constructed facade shatter. But the engineer in me, the part of my brain that thinks in terms of signals, frequencies, and controlled feedback, took over. A raw, uncontrolled outburst would be noise. What I needed was a perfectly mixed, masterfully produced, and devastatingly clear signal. The recording was my raw material. I saved the isolated conversation as a separate digital file, a little piece of poison I now held in my possession. That night, at dinner, I looked at Corinne across the table and saw a complete stranger. Every smile, every loving gesture, every shared reminiscence was now filtered through the horrifying clarity of what I knew. She spoke excitedly about the farewell party she was planning for the store, a grand event to celebrate our new chapter. She talked about guest lists and caterers, her eyes shining with a false, bright light. She was planning my wake, and she expected me to be the guest of honor. "We should create a slideshow, George," she said, her voice full of feigned sentimentality. "Photos from the store's history. It will be such a touching tribute." "That's a lovely idea, dear," I said, my own voice sounding unervingly normal. "I'll see what I can put together." The irony was a bitter pill. She was handing me the very tools I needed for her destruction. The following weeks became a strange and surreal performance. I had to play the part of the trusting, slightly melancholy husband on the verge of a bittersweet retirement. The legal process for the sale of the building moved forward. I met with Tristan and his lawyers, Corinne always by my side, her hand resting proprietorially on my arm. I read over the contracts, documents designed to strip me of my life's work, and I asked simple, harmless questions, playing the part of an old man out of his depth in a world of corporate law. Tristan treated me with a kind of patronizing indulgence, explaining complex clauses in simple terms as if to a child. He was so confident in my ignorance, so sure of his victory, that he never saw the cold, calculating mind behind my quiet nods. My true work began after the store closed each night. Motor City Grooves became my recording studio. My first project was to digitize my entire life. I went through decades of audio archives, not just the family tapes, but old recordings from the store. Interviews I had done for local radio, even the sound of the little bell above the door that had chimed for 30 years. I was gathering the sonic palette for my masterpiece. I found a tape of the day the store first opened, the sound of my first wife, Martha, laughing as we struggled to carry in the first box of records. I found a recording of a local band doing an in-store performance in the 80s. I found a snippet of my own voice from years ago, passionately explaining to a young customer why the bass on a Motown record sounds warmer on vinyl. Each sound was a piece of my authentic history, a stark contrast to the fabricated future Corinne was planning. My most important task was to gather more evidence. I knew one recording might not be enough. I needed a chorus, not just a single voice. I used my skills to turn my own home into a listening post. I placed a tiny, voice-activated recorder, no bigger than a sugar cube, in the base of a lamp in her living room. I hid another one in the decorative plant on the hall table, the one Corinne always used when she took her private calls. The recordings they captured over the next 2 weeks were a symphony of deceit. I would listen to them late at night in my workshop, the headphones my only companion. I heard Corinne on the phone with Tristan, their conversations a sickening mix of lovers' whispers and cold, hard business. I heard them laughing about my obsession with old music. I heard them planning their trip to Aruba, debating between resorts, spending my money before it was even in their hands. I heard Corinne talking to one of her friends, complaining about how stifling it was to live with a man so stuck in the past. But it will all be worth it, she had said, her voice dripping with avarice. The payout is huge. Freedom is just around the corner. Each recording was another track in my composition of her downfall. I began to edit them together, not like a lawyer building a case, but like a musician creating a song. I layered the sounds, weaving her lies in and out of the authentic sounds of my life. I took the sound of Martha's laughter and cross-faded it into the sound of Corinne mocking me. I took the sound of my own passionate voice, explaining the beauty of music, and mixed it with the sound of Tristan discussing how they would liquidate the store as assets. It was becoming a sonic narrative, a story told in sound, and it was the most honest and most brutal thing I had ever created. My son, who lived in another state, called me one evening. "Dad, are you sure about this?" he asked. "Selling the store? It's been your whole life." "Sometimes you have to close one chapter to start another," I said, the double meaning hanging in the air. He did not know the truth, and I intended to keep it that way. This was not about him. This was about me, my wife, and a history that I refused to let be erased by greed and lies. She thought she was writing the final track of my life. She had no idea I was in the studio, engineering a remix that would put her treachery on full display for the whole world to hear. Are all memories stored in sound? Let me know in the comments if a particular song or sound can take you back to a specific moment in your life. The Motor City Groove's Farewell Gala was Corinne's magnum opus of hypocrisy. She threw herself into the planning with the fervor of a Broadway producer, determined to create a perfect evening, a beautiful, poignant farewell that would mask the cold-blooded heist she was about to commit. She hired caterers, ordered flowers, and designed elegant invitations that spoke of celebrating a Detroit legend's next chapter. The guest list was a carefully curated mix of my oldest friends, loyal customers, local music journalists, and, most importantly, Tristan's corporate superiors and potential business partners. It was designed to be her coronation, the moment she gracefully transitioned from the wife of a humble record store owner to a wealthy, sophisticated woman of the world, all while appearing to be the most supportive and loving spouse imaginable. The full, unvarnished truth of her betrayal was revealed to me in this final stage of her planning. It was no longer just about the affair or the money. It was about her complete and utter contempt for the life I had built and the person I was. One evening, she was on the phone with the event planner, discussing the music for the party. The tiny recorder in the living room lamp captured every word. "No, absolutely no Motown," she said, her voice sharp with irritation. "And no 60s soul. It's so dated. I want something modern, something chic. Think minimalist electronic, something with a bit of class. This is not some dusty old sock hop. It's a celebration of our future." She was planning a party to say goodbye to a legendary Detroit record store, a store built on the legacy of soul and rock and roll, and she wanted to erase its very sound. She was not just closing a chapter, she was trying to burn the book. The most devastating revelation, however, came from the final recording I captured, just 3 days before the party. It was Corinne and Tristan, speaking in low, excited tones in our hallway. They thought I was asleep. "The final transfer from the sale is scheduled for Monday morning at 9 a.m., Tristan said. "The moment it hits our joint account, you make the wire transfer to the offshore account. I'll have the tickets to Aruba booked for a noon flight." "And George?" Corinne asked. "He'll be at the store, packing up his precious records," she said. And then she laughed, a cold, sharp sound that held no humor. "By the time he realizes the money is gone, we'll be halfway to the Caribbean. The lawyers will have him tied up in knots for months. He'll be left with nothing but a few boxes of worthless vinyl and a broken heart. A broken heart." She said it with such casual, dismissive cruelty. It was not just a crime of greed. It was a crime of profound emotional violence. She knew exactly what she was doing, the depth of the pain she was about to inflict, and she was looking forward to it. That was the moment the last of my hesitation vanished. My plan was no longer just about justice. It was about survival. It was about refusing to be the victim in the sad, pathetic story she had written for me. The immediate consequence of hearing that final tape was that my work in the studio took on a new, urgent focus. The audio piece I was creating was no longer just a collection of sounds. It had to be a perfect narrative weapon. I spent 2 sleepless nights hunched over my mixing board, my hands moving with a precision I hadn't felt in years. I treated the project like I was mastering a classic album. I painstakingly adjusted the levels, the equalization, the compression. I cleaned the hiss from the old recordings until my own voice and Martha's laughter sounded as if they were in the room. Then I took the recordings of Corinne and Tristan. I used my most advanced software to strip away all the background noise, isolating their voices until they were terrifyingly clear, intimate, and undeniable. I took her cold laugh and layered it over the sound of the bell on the store's front door. I took Tristan's smug voice talking about their escape and timed it to come in right after a clip of me on an old radio show, talking about how the store was my legacy for the community. The final mix was a 5-minute-long journey. It started with warmth and nostalgia, the sounds of a life well lived, a business well loved. Then, slowly, insidiously, the other voices began to creep in, first as whispers, then as clear, sharp words, dismantling the nostalgic harmony and revealing the ugly, dissonant truth underneath. It was a symphony of betrayal. The day of the party, Corinne was a vision of elegance and grace. She wore a stunning new dress, one I now knew had been purchased with money she planned to steal from me. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips cool. "Are you ready for our big night, darling?" she asked, her eyes shining. I looked at her, at this beautiful, poisonous stranger I had shared my life with, and I gave her a slow, sad smile. "I'm ready," I said. And I thought of the small, unmarked digital audio player in my jacket pocket, loaded with a single audio file that was about to bring her entire world crashing down. She thought she was the producer of this grand event. She had no idea I had already engineered the final mix, and the master track was devastating. Have you ever had to put on a brave face while knowing a storm was about to break? Let me know in the comments how you handled it. With the master track of my sonic revenge complete and loaded onto a discrete digital player, my focus shifted to the final, critical stage of the plan, setting the physical and emotional stage for the gala. I needed to ensure that the moment of revelation would have the maximum possible impact. This was not just about exposing Corinne. It was about creating a perfectly engineered environment for her lies to be consumed by the truth. My first decision was about the sound system. Corinne, in her quest for a chic atmosphere, had hired a DJ who came with his own modern, sterile-sounding speakers. I knew they would not do. They were designed for the thin, compressed music she preferred, not for the rich, nuanced audio landscape I was about to create. On the morning of the party, I told her I wanted to use the store's own vintage sound system one last time, as a final tribute. "Oh, George, must we?" she said with a sigh. "Those old things are so bulky." "It's important to me, Corinne," I said, my voice tinged with a carefully crafted note of sentimental pleading. "It's the sound of this place. It feels right." She relented, seeing it as another harmless quirk of the nostalgic old man she was about to discard. "Fine, darling," she said with a patronizing pat on my arm. "Have your moment." She had no idea she was agreeing to be condemned by the very equipment that represented my life's passion. I spent the morning meticulously checking and calibrating my vintage Alltech Lansing speakers, the same ones that had filled the store with music for 30 years. I positioned them carefully throughout the space, creating a perfect stereo field. I wanted every person in that room, no matter where they were standing, to be enveloped in the sound, to feel every nuance of the nostalgic recordings and every sharp, cutting edge of her whispered betrayal. The second part of my plan was to create a visual counterpoint to the audio narrative. Corinne had wanted a slideshow of photos. I took her idea and subtly bent it to my own purpose. I spent an afternoon in the back room, sorting through boxes of old photographs. I selected images that told the true story of the store. A black and white photo of me and my first wife, Martha, laughing on the day we signed the lease. A faded color picture of a line of kids stretching around the block for a midnight album release in the 70s. A photo of a famous Motown artist who had stopped by to sign records. I arranged them not in a digital slideshow, but as physical prints mounted on large poster boards that I placed around the room. It was a tangible history, a silent testament to the authentic past that Corinne was trying to erase with her. Minimalist electronic music and corporate-sponsored future. My final preparation was the most difficult. I had to ensure my own emotional response was perfectly controlled. I needed to appear as the sad, gentle victim right up until the final moment. I called my son, who still lived out of state, the day before the party. I told him about the gala, my voice full of a weary resignation. "It's a big night, son," I said. "Your stepmother has planned quite the event. I'm just trying to get through it." I knew he would hear the sadness in my voice and that it would worry him. While I did not want him there for the initial blast, his concern was a necessary layer of my performance. I needed the world to see me as a man being pushed into a future he did not want, not as a man about to detonate a bomb. On the afternoon of the party, just hours before the guests were scheduled to arrive, Corinne and Tristan did a final walkthrough of the store. I watched them from my small office in the back. They moved through the space with the confident air of conquerors. They laughed and toasted each other with champagne. Tristan pointed to the wall behind the counter, the wall covered with decades of signed posters and memorabilia. "That all has to go, of course," he said, his voice captured faintly by the microphone I had left active near the cash register. "We need a clean, minimalist aesthetic for the new brand." Corinne agreed without a moment's hesitation. "Of course, my love. A clean slate. A clean slate." They were not just taking my business. They were planning to whitewash my history. I sat there, listening to their final arrogant pronouncements, and I felt no anger. I felt only a profound, cold certainty. The audio player in my pocket felt heavy, a small, dense object containing a universe of truth. The stage was set. The audience was on its way. The sound system was calibrated for perfect, devastating clarity. And I, the quiet sound engineer, was ready to play the final, unreleased track of my life with Corinne, a track that would be a shocking debut and a brutal farewell all in one. Before the music starts, I need to ask your opinion. Hit the like button if you believe some moments demand a public reckoning. In the comments, tell me, what makes a betrayal unforgivable? Is it the lie or the lack of remorse? The guests began to arrive as the Detroit sky softened from blue to a bruised purple. Motor City Grooves, a place accustomed to the quiet shuffling of dedicated crate diggers, was suddenly filled with the clinking of champagne glasses and the murmur of conversations. I watched from the sidelines, playing the part of the gracious but melancholy host. I shook hands with old friends and loyal customers, accepting their commiserations with a sad, gentle smile. "George, we can't believe it's really closing," one of them said. A man who had been buying records from me since he was a teenager. "This place is an institution. All things must pass," I replied, my voice imbued with a quiet, philosophical resignation. Corinne, meanwhile, was the radiant star of the evening. She moved through the crowd with a dancer's grace, her arm linked with Tristan's, the two of them a portrait of a glamorous power couple. She introduced him to her friends, to the journalists, to his own corporate superiors, who had come to witness his latest acquisition. She was not just my wife. She was the brilliant strategist who had guided her aging husband into a lucrative and sensible retirement. Her performance was flawless. She laughed. She dabbed a perfectly timed, imaginary tear from her eye when talking about the store's beautiful memories. And she held my hand in a gesture of loving solidarity that made my skin crawl. The plan began to unfold exactly as I had engineered it. The physical photos I had placed around the room were having their intended effect. I watched as longtime patrons gathered around them, pointing and reminiscing. "I remember that day," one man exclaimed, looking at the photo of the midnight album release. "I was in that line." The boards became focal points of genuine nostalgia, silent storytellers of the store's true history, a stark, analog contrast to the slick, corporate atmosphere Corinne was trying to create. The DJ she had hired looked increasingly uncomfortable, his minimalist electronic beats fading into the background, unable to compete with the powerful hum of shared memory. About an hour into the party, Corinne decided it was time for the speeches. She stepped up to the small podium she had set up, a soft spotlight illuminating her. She tapped the microphone, a sound that was jarringly loud on my perfectly calibrated system. "Can I have everyone's attention?" She began, her voice smooth and polished. She launched into a tearful, hypocritical masterpiece of a speech. She spoke of her deep love and respect for me. She praised my passion and my dedication. She painted a poignant picture of our decision to sell the store, framing it as a mutual, bittersweet choice to finally embrace a quiet life together. "It's time for George to rest," she said, her voice cracking with emotion as she looked directly at me. "It's time for us to have our own chapter, away from all this. This isn't a goodbye to a store. It's a hello to a new life." The crowd was moved. A few people were openly crying. Tristan watched her with a smug, proprietary smile on his face. He was watching the performance he had paid for, the final, sentimental act that would legitimize their heist. After a long, emotional round of applause, she turned to me. "And now I think George would like to say a few words, and perhaps play one last song for us all." This was my cue. This was the moment the entire evening had been built around. I walked to the podium, the small, heavy audio player in my hand. I looked out at the sea of faces, at my friends, at the journalists, at the stone-faced corporate executives, and finally at Corinne and Tristan, who were standing together, beaming, ready to receive their final tribute. I took a deep breath. "Thank you, Corinne," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the pristine sound system to every corner of the room. "You're right. This place is full of memories. And memories are tied to sounds. The crackle of a needle before the music starts, the laughter of old friends, the whisper of a secret." I saw a flicker of unease in Corinne's eyes at my last word. "So, instead of a speech, I've put together a small audio tribute, a soundscape of this store's history, a journey through the grooves of our lives." I held up the digital audio player. It was connected by a simple cord to my vintage mixing board. I looked at Corinne and gave her one last, sad smile. "This is for you," I said, and I pressed play. The entire evening, every conversation, every toast, every lie had been the prelude. The main track was about to begin. The needle was about to drop. And the silence that would follow the song would be the most profound sound of all. Hit the like button if you're ready for the truth to be heard, and tell me in the comments, what's a sound you will never forget? I pressed the play button. The first sounds that filled the room were not music, but the warm, intimate crackle of a vinyl record. It was the specific, familiar sound of our favorite old jazz album, the one Corinne and I used to listen to on quiet Sunday mornings. A wave of soft, nostalgic murmurs went through the crowd. Corinne herself smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile for the first time all night, believing this was the sentimental tribute she expected. Then, from the left speaker, came the sound of my first wife, Martha's, laughter, a joyful, uninhibited sound I had carefully restored from a 30-year-old cassette tape. From the right speaker, my own voice from 20 years ago, passionately explaining the genius of the Stevie Wonder bass line to a young customer. The audio was rich, warm, and immersive. I was painting a picture with sound, the authentic history of a life lived in music. The crowd was captivated, lost in the nostalgic journey. Corinne's smile was still in place, a little tight now, perhaps finding the inclusion of Martha a bit distasteful, but she was still playing the part of the proud, supportive wife. Then the mix began to change. I had engineered it like a slow, creeping poison. Underneath the warm nostalgia, a new sound began to fade in, a low, almost subliminal whisper. It was the sound of her voice, her real voice. Her first line was barely audible, a snippet from her phone call with her friend. So stifling, stuck in the past. It was just clear enough to make a few people in the front of the room turn their heads, a flicker of confusion on their faces. Corinne's smile faltered. She shot a quick, nervous glance at the speakers, then at me. I remained perfectly still, my face a mask of quiet contemplation, as if I were just as lost in the soundscape as everyone else. Now the second set of voices began to rise in the mix. It was Corinne and Tristan, from the anniversary party recording. Their conversation about my being lost in the past and her needing to handle everything was now crystal clear, weaving in and out of the cheerful party chatter. The mood in the room shifted instantly. The nostalgic murmurs died, replaced by a tense, uncertain silence. People were exchanging confused, worried glances. They were beginning to realize this was not a tribute. This was something else entirely. Tristan's face had gone rigid, his smug smile replaced by a look of dawning horror. He knew that voice. He knew this conversation. He took a step away from Corinne, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was the first crack in their united front. And then came the crescendo. I faded out all the other sounds, leaving only one final brutal recording, the one from our hallway just 3 days prior. The sound system I had so lovingly calibrated delivered their words with devastating fidelity. Corinne's voice filled the room, sharp, clear, and stripped of all its practiced sweetness. By the time he realizes the money is gone, we'll be halfway to the Caribbean. The silence in the room was now absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket of shock. Every eye was on her. Her face had collapsed, the color draining from it until it was a ghastly, waxy white. She looked like a statue, her mouth slightly open in a silent scream. Tristan's voice followed, smug and final. He'll all be left with nothing but a few boxes of worthless vinyl and a broken heart. I let his words hang in the air for a full 10 seconds. A broken heart. The phrase echoed in the dead silence of the room, an indictment delivered in his own voice. Then, as a final, brutal piece of engineering, I layered her cold, sharp laugh over his last words. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. The sound montage ended. The only sound left was the gentle, ironic hum of the vintage amplifiers. For a moment, no one moved. Then, one of Tristan's corporate superiors, A stern-looking man in the front row slowly and deliberately stood up, looked at Tristan with an expression of pure disgust, and walked out. Another followed, and then another. His business associates were abandoning him in a silent, damning procession. Tristan, his face a furious red, turned on Corinne, hissing a single, venomous word at her before he too turned and stalked toward the door, pushing through the stunned crowd. Corinne was left alone, standing in the spotlight, the epicenter of a disaster of her own making. The friends, the customers, the journalists, everyone was staring at her, their faces a mixture of pity, revulsion, and stunned disbelief. Her mask was not just cracked, it had been atomized. Her carefully constructed world, her planned future of wealth and freedom, had been utterly and completely annihilated in 5 minutes of perfectly engineered audio. She looked at me, her eyes wild with a mixture of hatred and sheer panic. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply met her gaze, my expression one of quiet, profound finality. The quiet sound engineer she had so fatally underestimated had just given her a lesson in the power of a pure, clean signal. Her betrayal was no longer a secret whisper. It was the only sound left in the room. What is the sound of a perfect revenge? Hit the subscribe button if you think you just heard it, and tell me in the comments what you think the most damning sound in the world is. Corinne did not scream or cry. In the dead, heavy silence of the room, she simply turned, her movements stiff and robotic, and walked away from the podium. She did not look at anyone. She walked through the crowd of stunned faces, a sea of former friends and admirers, who now parted for her as if she were carrying a disease. The gentle bell above the front door chimed as she pushed it open, and disappeared into the Detroit night, a final, ironic piece of sound marking the end of her life with me. The party was over. The guests dispersed quickly and quietly, their hushed conversations a stark contrast to the cheerful chatter that had filled the room just an hour before. A few old friends stayed behind, clapping me on the shoulder, their eyes full of a fierce, protective loyalty. They did not need to say anything. They understood. We spent the next hour packing up not a party, but a crime scene. We took down the decorations, cleared the glasses, and restored the store to its normal, quiet state. By the time we were done, it was just me, the records, and the profound, cleansing silence. The next morning, I received a call from Tristan's lawyer. The deal was off. His client was terminating the contract, citing a breach of good faith. It was a hollow, legalistic formality. The truth was, Tristan's reputation was in tatters. The story of the party of the audio expose ripped through the city's business community. He was no longer seen as a savvy developer, but as a foolish, arrogant man who had been publicly humiliated. His career in Detroit was over. Corinne simply vanished. A week later, I found a scribbled note on the kitchen table. "I've gone," it said. There was no apology, no explanation. Just an admission of defeat. I later learned from my lawyer that she had signed a quitclaim deed, relinquishing any and all claims to our shared property and assets in exchange for my not pursuing legal action. It was not an act of remorse, but of self-preservation. She took what she could fit in her car and drove out of my life forever. The record store, my beloved Motor City Grooves, did not close. The story of the farewell gala turned it into a local legend. People came from all over the state, not just to buy records, but to stand in the room where it all happened. They came to support the old sound engineer who had refused to let his history be erased. Business was better than it had been in years. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer just a shopkeeper. I was a custodian of something the community had decided was worth saving. My son flew in from California the weekend after the party. He hugged me tightly at the airport. "Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I heard what happened. I am so sorry. I can't believe I didn't see it." "It's not your fault, son," I told him. Some sounds are pitched so high, only certain people can hear them. We spent the weekend together in the store, sorting through old Motown 45s, the way we used to when he was a boy. We talked for hours, not about Corinne, but about music, about life, about his mother, Martha. The betrayal had, in a strange and painful way, brought us closer, reminding us of the authentic, unbreakable bond that lay beneath the noise of the past few years. My life settled back into its familiar, comforting rhythm. The mornings were for coffee and the quiet crackle of a test pressing. The days were for talking music with customers who had become friends. The evenings were for the quiet solitude of my home, a home that was now truly and completely my own. My revenge was not in the ruin of Corinne or Tristan. Their own greed had accomplished it far more effectively than I ever could. My victory was in the silence, in the absence of her lies, in the purity of the sound that was left. It was in the cheerful chime of the bell on the store door, in the warm hiss of a needle finding a groove, in the restored harmony of my own life. I had taken the ugliest noise, the sound of betrayal, and I had engineered it into a truth so powerful it had not just saved me, but had reminded an entire community that some things, like the sound of a classic record, are too valuable to ever let go. That is how I got my so sweet revenge, and I would do it all over again. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me about a song that you feel tells a powerful story without a single word.